Lovely to join you all, and I understand the introduction, so I'm here to talk a bit about work we've been doing around sustainable futures. I may have missed my introduction, but just to let you know, I'm one of the LiveWork founders and the group director based in London, and I've been working to understand the role that design might play and the work that we might do to support the sustainable transition that we all need to see happen in the immediate future. So I hate to do this to you all, but I think any presentation around this topic always seems to need to start with something alarming. I won't dwell on it, but most of you will know that we face a climate crisis and that atmospheric CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing, leading to global warming and a climate destabilized climate. But we also face other ecological challenges or emergencies, one being around, an example being around the use of nitrogen and phosphorus in the soil. And my point here being that these things are not short-term things. These are kind of radical changes in the nature of the planet and the kind of support system that it is for us. So if we take another example around plastic waste in waterways and oceans, and the point here and the term Anthropocene, which you may have heard, is being used to kind of communicate that this is something that is a change in the kind of epoch that we live in, and that these impacts that we're having on the planet are, as it says here, likely to be in the fossil record, in the strata of the earth when future generations dig down to understand what was happening in the 21st century. So we're at the very beginning of adjusting to a very different times. So having said that, and just on the hopeful front, we're working at LiveWork under the hypothesis that design has a role to design our way out of these challenges. This is a phrase from Dutch design academic and writer Martin Neumeyer, whose studies have shown that that there is a need for a designerly way to tackle big challenges, and that the standard kind of managerial leadership ways are not sufficient, that we need the qualities of design in order to rethink how we live on the planet in this instance. So I'm just going to talk a bit about what we understand design to be, and then how design might need to rise to the occasion, how it might need to adapt to this context, and suggest some ways forward as a design practice. So one very well used and well referenced model around design is that it brings a lens of desirability of whether that's consumer or customer or citizen or the user, this perspective to businesses or organizations or government bodies, and that this complements more traditional focus on the viability of the business, that that commercial and financial perspective, but also to the feasibility, which is more the operational ability to get things done perspective. So for many years, design has said these two perspectives are missing: the human view, the human desirability, usability, these kind of things, and that this is where design has pitched itself for quite some time now. So our question is, so that view is very much around the human sphere, human organizations, human needs, human activities, and in a way works as if there was no ecological context that we're all living in. So our question is, if we bring that fourth lens around the sustainability of life on the planet, or the ecological perspective, what does that mean for the way that we go about designing things, changing things, to responding to some of those imperatives and the ecological impacts that we're having right now. So I guess the second design hypothesis is that this is also a human challenge, and that those things around desirability and usability and the human factors and the human nature of this change is also critical, so that we can't just approach this as a technical challenge, which is about measuring carbon and changing our electricity generation technology. It's not just about funding, it's fundamentally about how we change how we live and work in order to respond to that challenge. So we have to work with the people involved, whether they're the customers or the people in the organizations, to work through this change. So to then dig into this, so these 5 things are how Live Work talks about design and how design is different. So to unpack that idea that you need to design your way out of it, well, what does that mean? What does design do that is different from those other approaches to organizing and changing ourselves? So one, we've already talked about. Design talks a lot about being human-centric, about understanding human experience and human need, and making sure that those insights and knowledge come into the process, which leads to things being more desirable or more usable. The second one is that design is more of a collaboration, and that in many organizations there's a lot of division and departmentalization, or people talk in the UK a lot about silos, so that design enables a level of collaboration that means people can come together and around shared goals. So the second thing we also always see and as value of a designly approach. The third thing being the design ability to imagine things, to think about things differently, to bring that, this could be called creativity. What's the challenge? What are the alternatives? How might we think about this? How might we make it tangible and tell stories about what's possible, get people excited, bring that creativity? Fourth one is around design's ability to test things, to make models and prototypes and try things out and learn very quickly without risk, without huge expenditure, to bring that kind of approach to bear. And the fourth one is the design focus on putting something into context and understanding the system within which it exists. And the classic designerly way of talking about this is you design a chair for the room, and you design a room for the house, and you design a house for the street. So how do you do that? So I'm just going to talk through those things and how they might change with that ecological lens. So the first reflection is that our focus on the human-centric excludes the non-human, whether that is other living beings or natural systems, or in this case, materials. So the challenge, I guess, the design is, how do you step out of understanding human experiences and human needs and see a wider set of needs out there? We start to see trends in the world where in New Zealand a river has rights. So this idea of respecting and understanding the perspective of more than human world is to the fore, and I think is a challenge to design. And although it's I've given the example of a river, this is actually from some work we did with a manufacturer of home appliances, and we took an approach to say, okay, well, let's not just understand the needs of the people in the house, but let's understand the needs of the machine, and the needs that it might have to last longer, and what do the materials of that machine need if that machine is no longer wanted in that house? How do we sort of respect that there is aluminium and other materials in that machine that deserve to be thought about as part of the wider planet and considered with care rather than without consideration. The second theme we had around co-creative, my hypothesis here is that we're going to need to be even more co-creative and collaborative in the future. We're going to need to step outside of our organizations and step outside of our normal restrictions and think at a larger level. We're just stepping into this, I feel, at LiveWork, but we've been working in Europe with FedEx recently, and one of the things we've established there, which is something we've never done before, is a kind of movement within the company, starting with the design part of the organization, to look at the ecological crisis and to make space for them to talk about it and bring it into their work. So it's a new level of collaboration around a challenge that needed some space creating for it and for people to be able to work collectively on it. And I think in this space, we're seeing a big trend around collaboration in industries, between competitors or between suppliers and customers, in a way where more and more they're seeing that these challenges they can't resolve on their own. So if you're looking at changing the nature of the automotive sector, it's a collaboration between the whole supply chain, these kind of things. So how are we going to be able to run design at that kind of scale? Oh, it's gone ahead too many, excuse me. So the third one around reframing and envisaging, I guess my challenge to design is that it's potentially limited in what it understands as a kind of good, and often that good is around more and more consumption by humans, and that we're going to start to need to think creatively about what does it mean to be prosperous, to live well, but not necessarily own more, consume more, use more. So what does prosperity mean in a responsible way, with an ambition to use less energy, resources, and things? So just to illustrate this is has been an obsession of mine for 20 years, is how do we feel that we don't need to own a car anymore, but we maybe can use one when we need one. So I've designed lots of different car sharing services over the years, and I'm still waiting to see it explode and become the new normal. And I hope that will happen soon, because I don't know about in Brazil, but in the UK, most cars lie empty for 98% of their time. So we're wasting a huge amount of resource by not using it effectively and thinking strangely in a way about what it means to be prosperous. So the next one, I talked about experimental learning, kind of feels like this is going to have to step up as well, and that this is going to be something that is always going on with those big trends, with climate change and other ecological issues. We're going to see kind of more volatility and more unpredictability in the world as stuff happens. So we've all experienced stuff happening with the pandemic over the last few years. This picture's from the mutual aid services that kind of sprung up from the grassroots, from neighborhoods, in order to support more vulnerable people with food and deliveries. And these kind of things, I feel like, are going to be more and more required. We're going to see things happen. We're seeing, war in Europe all of a sudden here, and people are springing up and inventing new ways of supporting each other. And so I feel like there's a role for design in helping us to be able to respond and think on our feet. And finally, when I introduced this concept of kind of putting things into context, and obviously we're going to need to put that into an ecological context. So we're all going to need to understand better the natural systems and that we exist within, and understand how we can design for lower impact, and get our heads around, the wider system and the wider complexity. So I guess all of these things put an extra requirement, more work on the table in a way. And in this one, it's like really kind of thinking around corners and understanding, mapping, using systems thinking and systems level design. So in summary, we're suggesting that design is relevant. We're hoping that design is an important tool in tackling these challenges and adapting, but also that it's going to need to change and evolve in these 5 ways. So to be more than just human-centric, to be kind of hugely co-creative and collaborative, and see next levels of those kind of activities. And I guess to challenge what we think good looks like. What does prosperity look like? How could we live well in different ways that are lower impact? To be aware that things are going to change rapidly, and that we're going to need to kind of keep experimenting. It's not going to just be a kind of A to B transition. Things are going to be volatile for quite some time, and that we need to start thinking, systemically, ecologically, to really equip ourselves with that understanding of how things work outside of just human systems. So the challenge for us all, I guess, is just to wrap up, is how do we systematically invite this sustainability lens into the ways we think and the tools we use, to allow ourselves to research and design for more than human desirability. Thank you.